In order to hear me, you're going to have to be quiet.
That's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, well I'm going to dispense with this and I'm just going to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Mary McFarlane and I'm going to be chairing tonight. Welcome to our 5 panellists. We would have had 6, but the UKIP person pulled out. So, thank you very much to our 5 candidates for coming along. Passions can get high, as we all know, and I would ask everyone to please treat everybody with respect. I will try my best to make sure that all the questions are answered fairly and equally. And if you don't get the opportunity to ask your question, I'll have an open mic, hopefully for that time they'll be working, and you can ask them then. Each of the candidates are going to speak for 5 minutes. What I would like them to do is use the sticks that they've been given which has a number on them. So if you do that in turn, and that'll take half an hour. At the end of that, I've got a number of questions that you've all provided, and I will ask these questions of the panelists. They have 1 minute to answer the questions, and there's timekeepers at the front, so if they do start to go over, we've got a yellow card for 30 seconds left and a red card for stop talking. I would ask that nobody keeps talking over anybody else, because I think that that is downright rude. We have to allow people to ask questions and answer. So I ask the first person to kick off.
Right, I'll just go with my natural voice. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Good. Right, my name's Kenny Young. I'm the Labour candidate to be your MP. Midlothian's my home. I was brought up here. My dad's from Pathhead, my mum's from Colton Hall. They brought me up in Dalkeith. Apparently that was neutral territory. Look, I care about Midlothian. You know, I moved away for university. I lived in London for a short while, like a lot of young people do, and I moved back here because it's my home. It's the place in the world that I care most about. And so when I say that I think we can do better than the last 5 years, it's because I care about our home. But what do I mean when I say we can do better? Well, what I mean is we need change. You know, I think back to a story that happened to me in my role as a councillor. A lady asked me to go and see her. And she was out of work and she'd been down to her employment advisors and they had sorted her out with a trial shift, 2 bus journeys away, and they'd sent her off with the bus tickets that job seekers are entitled to. The lady asked me to come and see her because she had gone to get the bus, the first bus, and she hadn't been allowed on. The driver couldn't let her on because the ticket that she had wasn't valid for the night bus, and it was an overnight shift that she had, and she was worried about getting sanctioned. And she said to me, look, I spent the rest of my money on taking a piece, but if I'd known that I would need money for the bus, I wouldn't have bothered with the piece. But it was a 9-hour shift, so I thought I'd better take something to eat. Now if you think about what that means, not only should we be doing better than sending people off to a trial shift 2 buses away, but if people are making the choice between going to take their job or getting something to eat, we've got to think that's not the way a civilised society treats people. So I'm proud that Labour would scrap the bedroom tax, which was putting added pressure on that lady. I'm proud also that we'll get rid of this ridiculous idea of putting targets for the number of people that the job centre should sanction in any given week. You know, we need change, we know that, but also I'm proud of what Labour's offering in terms of positive change, not just taking away problems. You know, 1,000 extra nurses for the NHS in Scotland, and that's funding that I think is a result of people listening to the debate we had about the referendum. We made a choice to stay together as a country, but there was a clear voice that we had to do better as a country. So if people have £2 million houses, when they're sold, I think it's right. It doesn't matter where those houses are, if they're in the southeast of England, if they're in London, I think it's right that we redistribute that money from the rich to the poor and from one part of the country to another. I'm okay with that. And it's the same when we tax the bankers' bonuses, which is what Labour will do. You know, for people who are earning vast sums of money, you know, we'll use that money to take it full circle to provide a job or training or an apprenticeship guaranteed for every young person. So that's a classic example of helping people who need a start in life, using the money from people who've got it all. So I'm proud of that. Look, I'm proud of Labour's offer, I'm proud of Midlothian. I think that at the end of the day it's a clear choice. And I heed the Chair's words very clearly, so I'm not making any insinuations. It's a clear choice and it's up to you. If you want a Tory government, vote for a Tory government or don't vote Labour. If you want a Labour government, which is the alternative, then vote Labour. And I'm sure there'll be a chance to cover all sorts of topics for the rest of the day. But thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. My name is Ian Baxter. I'm the Green Party candidate. We're starting from a more difficult position than my colleagues here because having been locked out from leaders' debates, having been locked out of the media, a lot of you probably don't know to a large extent what we stand for, apart from the environment. Back in October of last year, John Finney, an independent MSP, joined the Greens and he said, "I've been Green all my life, I just didn't realise it." And we are often accused of being a one-issue party, caring only about the environment. But we are much more than that. We've actually got policies on everything from the economy to energy, from workers' rights to welfare, from taxation to technology. But up until now, the media's only concentrated on environmental policies. Now, it's not that the environment's not important, it is, it's crucial. But for the Greens, that's our starting point. When you accept, as we do, that 80% of fossil fuels has to remain within the ground for us to pass on an environment worth living in to future generations, then that affects how you approach the economy. When you accept that we can no longer overexploit the planet for resources, it affects how you decide to share the wealth we've already got. And when you accept that the environment, how we currently live as a species depends very much on an economic model which is unsustainable, a model which is exploitative to both mankind and to nature, one which concentrates wealth and resources in the hands of the few, and one which values consuming above conserving, it affects how you view every activity in society. And that's why we have policies on a wide range of issues. And those policies are consistent with a desire to create a just and sustainable society based on renewable resources. So yes, we do need to protect the environment, but we also need to change society. We need to move away from well-being being measured as spending power. For example, our current country's wealth at the moment is measured by gross domestic product. GDP measures consumption. So for example, we grow richer if a house burns down, cars crash, or floods need cleaning up. But if we insulate houses, we get poorer. The UK is one of the richest countries in the world, and yet one of the most unequal. And it's one of the least sustainable, both environmentally and economically. So we say that we need a transition from oil and coal-based industries to an economy based on renewables, by investing in skills, training, research and development. We need to move to a higher wage economy. We need to eradicate poverty by raising the minimum wage and an end to austerity. We need to focus on public service, not shareholder value, by bringing the railways and Royal Mail back into public ownership and breaking up the banks in favour of community banks and credit unions. We need to bring control back to people who create the wealth by helping rural communities to own the land they work on, by helping urban communities to own and run the village halls and the community centres, by helping workers to buy out failing businesses, to form workers' cooperatives, and by helping football fans, for example, to run and to own the clubs they support. The green philosophy is not just about the air we breathe, it's about people and it's about the planet. And And it's something which resonates with many people today. At the 2010 general election, over 580,000 people logged onto a site called voteforpolicies.org.uk. They answered questions on which policies they agreed with, not knowing which parties those policies belonged to. And yet 27.8%, by far the largest percentage of any political party, it was the Greens. That exercise is being repeated this year, and there's over 400,000 people already logged in across the UK, and the Greens are currently second with over 20% support. So like John Finney, many people are realising they're Green, and people are looking for a new kind of politics now, and finding it in the Green Party. Membership of the Scottish Greens increased sixfold in the last year, and as our membership did in Midlothian. And it's not something to do with the referendum. Membership of the English and Welsh Greens increased fourfold. Green politics is not about chasing opinion poll ratings. Our policies are principled, consistent and increasingly popular. And the Green vote is no longer seen as a wasted vote. It's seen as voting for something you believe in. Because voting for what you believe in is the only way to eventually get what you want. Surely the only wasted vote is for something you don't believe in.
Good evening, my name's Owen Thompson and I'm the SNP candidate for the coming general election. I have grown up in Midlothian, having moved here as a young boy in 1985. Attended Paradise Primary School in Lonehead and then on to Beeslack High School here in Pennycook. For the last 9 years I've been a councillor in Midlothian, and for the last 18 months of that, the leader of Midlothian Council. I have to say, being a councillor in elected office and the role as council leader is one of the greatest privileges I think anyone could ever have, to represent the community that you're from and where your friends and family live and where you're involved in the various community groups. It really is, for any of us who are elected officials, a great honour. In this election I'm looking to put myself forward to represent you in the House of Commons. This election is unlike any general election I can ever remember. For so many years we look at the Westminster elections and the SNP were seen as almost an afterthought. By the time we got to the national news and in the last recent years where we have TV debates, the SNP weren't even mentioned. Not this time. This time around, the SNP are front and centre. And the reason for that, I think the people of Scotland have said loudly and clearly, they want change. The current status quo is not something they want to see. In September last year, people said no in a referendum, and I think we all accept that outcome. We don't necessarily have to like it, but we absolutely accept it. But that does not mean we have to stand still. There are so many opportunities for us to do so much more within the powers that we have, and to actually make the case and argue for an extension of these powers. Unlike the main parties standing in this election, the SNP are standing on a platform to invest in our future, to add additional investment, to grow our way out of the current challenges we have. An alternative to the austerity programme of cuts proposed by Labour and Tories, backed up by the Lib Dems at Westminster, that we've seen over the last years and clearly outlined in all the manifestos for the years to go ahead. A modest increase in public expenditure, more money going to our vital frontline services and public services, would allow us to grow our economy and still pay off the debt that we have. It's not an either or. Both can be achieved. It really is an opportunity in this election to say we do want a voice in Westminster, an SNP voice from Midlothian, who will make that case to say we've had enough of these cuts. I have so much experience now in the council in dealing with the impact of these cuts. As Westminster passes reducing budgets onto the Scottish Government, council funding has fallen as well. The previous administration in Midlothian had to save £10 million over the 5 years they were in administration In the 3 that we've had, we've already had to save 12. By the end of the term in 2017, that'll be £18 million we've had to make savings. That cannot go on. We all, I think, want to see strong public services, and the way to do that is to look to say, enough is enough. We are not taking these cuts anymore. We want to see investment, and we want to see it happening now. Let's support our public services and make sure we grow our way forward for the future. That's my case to you. If you agree with me and think that that is a better way, an alternate to the cuts that we're seeing proposed in varying forms, but all essentially the same thing, then vote for the SNP on the 7th of May and make a case to say that we do want that stronger voice from Midlothian and Westminster, and that stronger voice is me.
Ballantyne. I'm the Conservative candidate, so I'll get just as loud an applause at the end of this. I'll let you do it. Good, excellent. In the interest of fairness. Listen, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself, and I'm going to tell you why some of your assumptions are not always right. My background is quite simple. I trained as a nurse originally in the health service, and then I went into health service management. Partly because I was concerned about a lot of the things that I saw going on. And actually, once you work your way through a public sector service, you start to understand what the issues are and where the problems are. When we moved back to Scotland in 1990, we came to set up a manufacturing company. My husband had left the armed services and wanted to start his own business. Now, that's quite important because the lesson learned from 1990 to now is actually, how do you create wealth? How do you ensure that we can pay for the public services that I hold so dear and that I've worked most of my career in and want to see survive? Because this idea that somehow because you're Conservative you don't care about the NHS and you just want to privatise it, you don't care about social welfare, you don't care about anybody except some rich landowners down the road, is just utter rubbish. But it suits everybody else to keep actually pushing that myth forward. So let's get a couple of things out of the way. I am not rich. I don't even own my own house. I actually sold the house I owned to pay the wages of the staff that I had so that they wouldn't have to be short-timed or lose their jobs when times were hard. So we'll get that bit straight, okay? Public sector, okay? I don't believe that the NHS should be anything other than free at the point of access for those who need it. That's what I've always worked for, that's what I'll always work for. But to start hypothesising or saying, therefore, you have no privatisation, is utter rubbish. There are parts of the NHS that have always been private. And anybody who knows anything about it will understand that, because GPs are private practices that are commissioned and paid for by the NHS. It was the deal that was done right at the outset in terms of setting up the NHS. So you have to understand what you're arguing about before you start saying things that just don't add up. It is absolutely vital that you get the care that you need when it's needed, right? Now, to me, outcomes are the main thing. If you send your child to school, you expect them to be literate at the end of their primary school, in mine, their high school. You want them to be able to do good maths. You want those who have ability to go on and do the best they can possibly do. And that's what's important. The arguing about teacher numbers, the arguing about whether you have a brand new building, those are not what make the outcomes. I have seen some of the most incredibly good kids come out with those successful outcomes from some of the poorest schools, simply because they had good teachers, they had dedicated teachers, they had teachers who knew how to teach. That's what's important. We have to enable our public sector workers to be able to do the jobs that we employ them to do. In terms of terms and conditions, 5 years ago, and anybody who thinks otherwise we can argue the toss later about it, but 5 years ago the country faced a real problem. Not a pretend one, not one made up for the benefit of politics, but a real one. We had a debt position that was becoming unmanageable and has got even more unmanageable. I'll make no bones about it. The debt has nearly doubled in the last 5 years because we've been running a huge deficit. Now, so long as we keep doing that, the interest payments on that money gets paid out of the money we have and is taken away from the very services we want to deliver. Now, you can argue about it, you can shout about it, you can get hot under the collar about it, but the fact remains the same. We do have to get rid of it because it's eating up the money we want to do other things with. And Owen made the point, I'm an elected member on Scottish Borders Council, and although our actual budget is not being cut as such, we get the same money, what is actually cutting it is the rising cost of delivering those services. So the difference is the increase in wages that we have to pay, the increase in any materials we have to buy, and the increase in running costs. We all know that our electricity bills have gone up. That's what's causing our issues, and that's what we need to address. Now, the economy is growing faster than it has done in any other G7 economies. Sorry, I've got terrible cough. And we have to actually keep that going. That's what we have delivered for you in the last 5 years. Employment's up, the economy's growing, and we are dealing with some of the big issues. You may not like it, but it has to be dealt with. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and I think we need to have a proper discussion on it.
What is interesting? I'll tell you that now. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aisha. I am your Lib Dem candidate. Thank you, first of all, to Mary and all the guys at Midlothian for arranging this and inviting me along tonight, and thank you for all coming along. I am not a politician. I don't have a glamorous political background. I've never worked in politics. I've just recently ventured into politics, so I'm not a career politician. I have no baggage or anything like that. I'm just an ordinary, average woman, worked really, really hard, just like all of you, trying to make ends meet, and it's difficult most days, most weeks. I worked in banking for about 12 to 13 years, worked for RBS. I wasn't a high-flying big earner, no massive bonuses, just standard, average worker. Well, actually not, I was an amazing worker, but you know, average in many other ways. Average family, just run-of-the-mill person. What I do have is a very, very strong work ethic that's been drilled into me by my parents, and their mantra always was, if you want it, you earn it. But you earn it fairly and you earn it honestly. And that's something I still use today and I carry forward with me. My political awakening, if you can call it that, it's a bit of a grand phrase, but it started after the credit crunch when I worked with RBS. I lost everything. I lost my life savings, I lost my career prospects, everything that I had channeled basically 10, 12 years worth of effort into was gone, or whatever was left was absolutely meaningless. Now, I was one of the lucky ones. I was very, very fortunate. My family are mostly self-employed. Big times were tough for them as well. I still had something very, very small to fall back on, but a lot of my friends, colleagues didn't, and they're still bearing the repercussions of that event today. At the time, the thing I couldn't understand was how this had happened. How had the Labour government, whose watch that was at the time, 2008, how could they have let this happen? I began to get a little bit more interested in politics, began to sort of listen to more of the parties, and the thing that really sort of got me then was I was getting more and more frustrated. I can't swear, so I've got to be careful what I say. Frustrated with the level of spin that I was hearing. The Liberal Democrats was the only party that resonated with me because their ideology is for everyone. They stand for a fairer society. They want to build a really, really strong economy that creates opportunities for everybody across the board. So it doesn't matter what end of the financial spectrum you're in, what you earn, what colour you are, what your religion is. Everybody gets an opportunity to better themselves, better their lives for their families. No industry, in my opinion, and this is obviously from personal experience, no industry should be left unchecked to the extent that the Labour government left the financial industry. Straight up, that is my absolute firm view. The Labour government, it was on their watch all of this happened. No industry ever should wield that amount of influence over any economy or any government ever. In my personal opinion, I think the Lib Dems have really proven themselves in the last 5 years of the coalition. I'm sure lots of people disagree. Thanks to the Lib Dems being in government, we've seen pensions go up in real terms. That's over £900 per year in real terms. The tax threshold's been increased. Now that's something that David Cameron and Alex Salmond both said could not be done. David Cameron said, nice idea, lovely, great, can't afford it. We pushed it through. We pushed and we pushed it through. We're now £800 better off. 3 million people have been lifted out of tax, paying tax. That's not a small achievement. We're one of the fastest growing economies in the G7, as Michelle mentioned before. We're vying with the US. Now, given where we were in 2008 with the crash caused under the Labour's government's watch, that's a massive achievement in my view. The New Borders Railway, that was a Lib Dem initiative as well. Have we got everything right, Coalition? Absolutely not, and I'm not even going to pretend address anything of that respect. As an economy, as a society, as a country, are we where we should be? Absolutely not, but we are on track, and I think that's the important thing. The tide is turning. I work in my family business now, and I can tell you, I know that all the changes that have been applied, one size does not fit all in the UK, and there are certain parts of the UK that are suffering more than others. And I can tell you first-hand experience, I'm one of those people. I'm still feeling the recession 7, 8 years on after that event. I struggle to pay my staff wages sometimes. I'll go without my own wages, just so that they can make sure that their mortgages are paid, their rents are paid, that they can buy groceries that week. But it's important to mention, for me, I'm seeing that tide is turning. Thanks to the mess led by the Labour government, the Coalition's had a tough job. In my view, what we've seen is that government does need a Liberal voice to keep them grounded, yet at the same time moving forward. I believe that Tories left to their own devices, they will cut their way through the next 5 years. That will affect the poorest and the most vulnerable in society. They are just far too obsessed with protecting the wealthy. Oh well. Later on, I'll finish it off.
Some of you have given questions in, and I'm going to start asking the candidates if we can answer the questions that you've given. You all come from Midlothian. You're all standing for Midlothian. As a resident of Midlothian, who potentially could be going down to Westminster, what of all of the topics are you most passionate about? And I'd like to start with Owen.
I think we need to be going to Westminster to make the case to support the most vulnerable in our economy. I think we have so many people across Midlothian who need help. They need our help, they need our support, and they need us with the broader shoulders to do what we can to give that help and to give that lift. This is why I come back to my point that the further cuts are not the answer. The changes to welfare, the introduction of universal credit, it is not the answer. We need to send MPs to Westminster who will argue against these changes and make sure that we can put in place the necessary support to make sure that those who do fall in hard times do have that support and have the help and the support to get back on their feet and to just move themselves forward. It really is, there is no more fundamental reason, I think, to get involved in politics and to help those who can't help themselves.
To some degree, same answer but different. I'm most passionate about sorting out the financial position. And the reason I'm most passionate about sorting out the financial position is because if you don't do that, you can't do anything else. It's really that basic, as I said earlier. The economy supports everything we want to deliver. We've got quite a lot of devolved powers coming to Scotland soon, so there'll be choices that will be made in Scotland about where we actually distribute money and how we distribute money. But actually the key thing is, it's not just about helping one part of society, it's about helping all parts of society, because we are all having to work together to do it. We work together on a daily basis in whatever form it is, whether you're an employee or an employer, whether you're the nurse or the patient, we have to actually do it together. And actually, if we don't get the economy right, we will be fighting each other in the future, I guarantee you. Because money will become shorter, the ability to do the things we want to do will become harder, and then people will start to get angry, because that's the reality. So just as when I made the decision to sell the house to pay my wages, to make sure the people that we employ don't suffer, we have to make sure we've got the money to pay the wages of all the country.
In my opinion, the thing I'd be more passionate about is similar to Michelle and Owen, is the economy. It's about getting the deficit down, it's about getting the debt down. Everything is controlled by finance. If we get the economy sorted, which we are doing, which has been getting done for the last 5 years, then we can get the funding for the NHS, we can get the funding for better social housing, which is important in Midlothian, we can get better funding for transport links, rail links, social care. That's a big thing for me. All that comes down to the economy and the state it's in, and I believe that the Liberal Democrats in government have been moving forward, we have made progress, but it's not a quick fix. It's not a quick fix to turn around the destruction that was left by the last Labour government, but that's the thing I would fight for.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that underpinning all that is the whole democratic system, which needs a big shake-up. We've heard a lot of talk about who is going to form a coalition with who. Vote for A, you'll get B. Vote for C, it's a wasted vote. And I think that this has totally distorted the way democracy runs in this country, and it's got to be changed root and branch. I think that we've seen over the last few years of MPs who've had second jobs, one of which said he earned £5,000 in the morning, but he wants to do this as well as his day job as an MP. We've got a House of Lords, which is the only, apart from Iran, is the only legislating body in the world that has got unelected clerics in it. You know, that's the kind of thing we really need to shake up. We need to get rid of the first past the post system, get a proper proportional system in place. We want a system which encourages far more women to get into politics than at the moment. And I really think that that's where we should start, because that underpins everything, every decision taken over this country.
Look, that's a great question. Look, Owen talks about protecting the vulnerable, but look, with the greatest respect to you, Owen, you know, you're leading the council. That's
rather than address Owen, could you address me, please?
Okay, Owen, sure. So,
can we leave please, what are you passionate about? What are you as an individual passionate about? All of the issues.
Protecting the vulnerable as well. That's why, if I was running the council, I wouldn't have hammered the older people with a big charge of £156.
This is about Westminster.
Sure.
What are you passionate about?
I was explaining my passion, if you'd allow me to. Passion. But look, I think one of the big things we do need to do is figure out how our young people can go from just now, where some of them have all the doors in life open to them, and some people have all the doors closed. You know, we're in danger of ending up with two different kinds of life chances in Midlothian. One for people who have everything and one for people who don't. So I'm really passionate about improving the life chances of people so that they have a whole world ahead of them rather than the doors closed. That's why I'm proud that Labour will guarantee a job, training or apprenticeship for young people, and that's what I'm passionate about.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is about the systems that are in place in terms of governance, in terms of the NHS, any of the systems that we as people have to get a service of any kind. I want you to answer me in this way. Many things are measurable. We know in the NHS are measurable, finance is measurable, outcomes are measurable. What about the types of things that are not measurable? And when do you say this system is broken? The system...
You're all wondering how to answer that now.
Many things are measurable, a lot of things aren't, and one of those things is people's well-being. So it's all the things that are not measurable with a tick box. Many of our systems are governed by that. So I'd like an answer first from Ian.
Yeah, I too am a councillor on the Midlothian Council, and one thing that perplexed me are things called performance indicators. Performance indicators, some of them statutory, some of them they don't have to be done by the council, but they're done to measure each council against each other. And the bizarre thing about this is that you can't tell what information you're being given. And these performance indicators have been set up for exactly that reason, so we can measure failure, so we can correct it. But I've asked questions like, for example, we've got measurements. We spend so much on road repairs, but does that mean that we've got the best roads in the country? Or the most inefficient
This is about
road
Westminster.
But if the same principle applies, if you're trying to measure things, I mentioned in my opening speech about gross domestic product as a measurement of well-being, and it's not, because if you spend anything, it goes into GDP. So if we have floods and we have to clear them up because of climate change, then that increases our wealth. So I don't know how to answer your question, because even the things that we're measuring wrongly. So how on earth can we detect whether we're failing on things that we're not measuring?
Thanks.
That's a good question about the things that you can measure and what you can't. Maybe one of the things is how an area looks. Maybe that's a measurement for whether people feel like they've got the chances in life. Maybe that's a measurement for whether they feel like they live in somewhere to be proud of. Maybe that's a measurement of how well they're being served by government. Are government providing things that make an area somewhere to be proud of? So you can't measure that, but when you walk in a place or you drive through a place, you can tell. And maybe that's one of the measurements that we need to think more about, the unmeasurable, the feel of a place. When you're in somewhere, do you get a sense that this is part of the world that is looked after? Is this part of the world that's being served well by government? Maybe in some of our parts of the county the answer is yes, but in some parts of our county the answer is no, and that's one of the things that we need to improve on. But it's a good question, good thing to think about.
That's a really good question, actually. How do you measure the unmeasurable? Well, I don't know. To be really honest, I don't know if everything is unmeasurable, to be honest with you. I think you can measure pretty much everything. Well-being is a measurable issue, in my opinion. The biggest thing you can do is listen. Whoever your elected MP will be, they need to have a passion and a care and compassion for their community. And the best way to get a feel and to understand when something's broken, that there's no indicator for, there's no measuring tape or anything for, is to listen to the voters, because ultimately the decision is in your hands. It's my hands, your hands, about what's going to happen on May the 7th. So the person that you elect in needs to have two of these, and I believe we were given two of these and one of these for a reason, that we should listen more than we talk. And sadly, politicians, I think these days, do more of the other. But yeah, listening, that's the way I would measure. I think that's a good answer.
I think there's a danger when you start to talk about the unmeasurable and start to measure it, then it's not unmeasurable anymore. And it's a very, very difficult question, because even well-being, there is an institute that measures well-being of nations, and Norway and the Scandinavian countries regularly come out in the top of that. So I'm sure there's a think tank or a body somewhere would be more than happy to take a whole lot of money to work out how to measure the unmeasurable. It's about making sure that we look at outcomes, I think. There's been a greater shift towards outcomes in recent years, and outcomes are something that tells you, is it working or is it not? It's not about the inputs going in at the start of a system, it's what's it actually doing for us. And I think if we can start looking at that, start thinking about things in those terms, then you actually get a better system of measuring, which does include, I think it is right, I think everything becomes measurable eventually.
That's the problem. We're trying to measure everything, and you can't measure everything at all. And the reason we're trying to measure everything is because government's got bigger, democracy has moved further away from the people, and so they try to do everything by measuring it and telling you you've got it right. I actually think that you need to get rid of a lot of this measurement. You need to push decision making down to the bottom, and actually then you don't need the measure, because people tell you that they react and you've got it there. And I can feel Owen next to me thinking, yeah! But it's right to some degree, okay? Obviously I didn't agree with having independence, but I do agree with the degree of non-measure by having decision-making made local. And I think that's when it's important, because then you know without having to measure what's going on. Thank you.
What is your party intending to do to get equal representation? Kenny, can you start with this one?
Sure. Well, the Labour Party, you know, the first major party, certainly, the first party may be that brought forward Alderman shortlists, which I think is a big part of equal representation. It's not the only part. And then the Labour Party were, as I remember, sued by disgruntled male members who felt that they weren't getting the chance, and so then, through Harriet Harman, changed the law to allow Alderman shortlists, which, you know, they don't benefit me, but I strongly agree with them. I think the next question is, where do you go? We've just spoken about things that you can't measure, but is it worth measuring it? You know, maybe we should think if 15% of people are from minority ethnic groups, maybe Parliament should be 15%, and maybe we should make sure that our parties have structures that do that. But look, Alderman shortlists were something I support, and something that, you know, maybe we need to look further at in terms of widening access from minority ethnic groups, disabled people, and that kind of thing.
Issue with like phraseology, like that word phraseology, equal representation, things like that. Liberal Democrats got a 2-for-1 with me, female and Asian, so they're quite happy with this. But I absolutely think that Westminster does not represent the UK at all. We are a fabulously colourful, culturally rich, diverse nation, and Westminster is very grey, it's very white, it's very middle upper class, it's very straight. And I think everybody here would agree with that, to be honest with you. So when our nation is not like that, why is Westminster? We need more diversity. Absolutely more diversity. But I'm also not a big fan of positive discrimination. I don't want to be chucked on a stage just because of the colour of my skin and because my anatomy is different. I want to be chucked on a stage because I'm able and I'm competent and people believe in me. So I think it's a dangerous thing as well. We've got to be really careful with issues like this. Yeah, we need ethnic minorities, we need gay, lesbian, we need disabled, we need ordinary people like me that don't have any political baggage to represent the country fully. So that's, I'm kind of mixed on that one.
We're going to ask if you could use the mic because people at the back can't hear you.
Probably hear me off better than Steve.
Switch on and pass on.
No better.
Too loud. My third heart attack this week.
Does that work?
No.
Keep going.
Okay, does that work? Oh, yeah. Now I sound loud. Okay, I don't believe in positive discrimination because it's a discrimination. I believe that everybody should have equal opportunity regardless of colour, race, gender, creed, disability. And I'm pleased to say that I honestly haven't found in my party that they do discriminate in any way. So therefore I don't feel the need for positive discrimination. No, it's true. I mean, you know, you go along, you meet people from all walks of life, and there's a perception, but it's not about who's in the party, it's about who stands in the first place and who wants to get involved. And if anything, it's because politics is unpalatable to a lot of people, and we need to encourage that and make it more interesting for people.
I do believe that there needs to be some sort of positive discrimination. Yes, I also agree with Michelle that we need the best people in these positions of power, but very often the best people get shouted down by men, and I should see, that's what we often do. But the Greens have got a very good record on this. We've had a gender balancing policy for some years, and as a result I think we're way ahead of the other political parties. Out of our 31 candidates, about over 40% are actually women. We've just selected our lists for next year's Holyrood election, and we have our policy is for 40% of all winnable seats have to be men and 40% women as a minimum, and we've achieved that.
We don't have any kind of formal balancing equality system in place as yet, although that is a discussion that continues to be ongoing. We look at the selection process for this election, and In 44 seats, the SNP had female candidates standing for selection, and in half the party selected a female candidate. So, in fact, where we do have a female candidate standing, the party's been very good at getting the gender balance. That being said, we have realised that more needs to be done, and we've established the SNP Women's Academy. We're encouraging more and more women to get involved in frontline politics, although it is very much, any time it comes up at conference, it is a fairly, well, it's a strong level of debate that takes place, and I think that's the safest way I could put that. We don't have zip lists, we don't have quotas as yet, but it's certainly something that's always being looked at.
Question is, what is your stance on Trident? Ian, could you kick off, please?
Yeah, we're totally against the renewal of Trident. We're talking about £100 billion over many years. Somebody said that what about the jobs on the Clyde, but we say that's probably the most expensive job creation scheme ever. We think that can be better spent elsewhere, but it's not about the money, it's not about the jobs, it's just morally indefensible.
My view on Trident, can you hear me? My view on Trident, I don't like nuclear weapons, I just don't think they should exist anywhere in the world. I think the focus should be on disarming nuclear weapons throughout the world, actually. That said, I think that we've got to look very, very sensibly at Trident. There are a lot of people employed. You can't just remove Trident overnight. I think it should go, but I think it should be a slow process, a planned process, so that people aren't going to suffer as a result of that. There's cottage industries that have been created around Trident. We have to look at that. And we also need to have a military deterrent. We are an enviable nation in the world. There's a lot of conflict in the world. Look at Russia, Ukraine, look at what's going on in the Middle East. Africa. The reality is it's not a very nice world out there, and there's enough nutcases out there that are willing to press a button. So I think it should go, but I think we can't just switch it off overnight. I think it needs to be planned with replacements and so forth, planned to get put in place.
Look, I would vote to continue the continual at sea deterrent. I think when you look at what the aims of that are, it's stopping war. One of the easiest things to do is to stand up in front of an audience that might not be friendly and say the things that they want to hear. I'm not interested in doing that. You know, I'm interested in telling you my views. You make your own mind up if you haven't already. My view is that Ukraine is one of the only countries that's given up its nuclear weapons voluntarily. That hasn't led to peace. What I want to see is the submarines renewed, and then I want to negotiate with other countries, Israel, Iran, France, America, the former Soviet Union, to get their nuclear weapons reduced. My aim isn't small, which is just to Britain give up nuclear weapons like we did with a handful of warheads in the 90s, which wasn't reciprocated. My ambition is much bigger, in fact, than people who say, yes, scrap Trident. My ambition is using it to actually get multilateral disarmament.
So it's not going to be
These questions later, thank you. And our last person.
I could be very quick and say what Ian said. No, I mean, to me, Trident's the worst possible case of macho posturing any government could possibly have. There's absolutely no need for it. We're never going to use it. I think that has to be the reality. And even if the UK wanted to, they couldn't without the permission of the United States. It's not just our It's an entirely huge waste of money that could be put in other far more vital services. A conventional defence force, that's what we need. Our naval waters are not protected just now. Trident isn't doing that. We're not got the basic protections we need because we're wasting money trying to posture about like one of the big boys on the international stage. Somebody on the planet has to take the lead. Why shouldn't it be us?
My apologies, Michelle.
It's okay. Wouldn't it be a wonderful world if we had no nuclear weapons?
Yes.
Yes. The fact is we do. They exist, and you can't unexist them in that way. Trident is part of the NATO nuclear shield, and we're signed up as a partner in NATO. Now, the arguments around the money, yeah, it sounds great, but the 100 billion that actually belongs to Trident, or the cost of Trident, is a global cost that everybody contributes that's involved with that shield. Okay, the cost, estimated cost of Scotland, Alex Salmon said, is 163 million. If you took the employees that sit around Fastlane, okay, and you just said, okay, we're going to pay them 25,000 a year, a lot of them are earning a lot more than that, okay, that's 250 million per annum. So the detriment to Scotland of your ambition to just scrap Trident overnight is huge. So that's the point you've got to think about, even before you start thinking about the fact that we're part of NATO. So right now, I'm keeping it as we stand, but I think we do need to change the way we look at the armed forces and the future for it.
I think the hardest of my job is make sure that you're not equal. Another question here. How are you going to improve the lives of the people of Midlothian? And I'll get Aisha.
Improving the lives of people in Midlothian, as I mentioned in one of my earlier answers, it's about listening to what matters to the people of Midlothian. It's about listening about the issues about housing, what's going on with crime, funding cuts that are happening from the council. It's about listening and talking to people. It's about knocking on doors, making the phone calls, talking to all of you and saying what is important to you, what's affecting you, and you, and what can I do about it. That's really for any MP anywhere, that's the fundamental job of any elected representative, is listen to your constituents. Don't give them solutions to problems that don't exist. Give them solutions to problems that do exist, that matter and are important to them.
Thank you.
Midlothian, like all the areas, needs exactly what everyone else needs. It needs jobs available, decent earnings for people. It needs to be able to afford to live the way you want to live. It needs good education to give young people opportunities. And get the economy right, those things flow down out of it. So Aisha's right, you have to actually represent what people want. There's no doubt about that. We have actually higher youth unemployment in Midlothian than in many other places. And we have to stimulate the economy to ensure that the jobs are available. You can't do anything but work your way out of problems. Actually, you've got to earn the money to do it. And actually, as benefits increase, and there are more benefits, inequality increases, and I don't want to see inequality increasing.
Owen.
Yeah, I think probably a common theme that maybe I'll end up being across the board here is it's the creation of new jobs, jobs that are well paid and support the people of Midlothian to go on and achieve the ambitions they want for themselves. I think, to me, the best way to achieve that would be to see further devolution of the job creating powers we want to see coming to Scotland so that it can be best focused and targeted to meet our needs and not be tailored by Westminster, who perhaps are that bit further detached from what we need locally. We've seen positive destinations improving in Midlothian, and that level of job creating powers would help to sustain that, to create these new jobs, and ultimately a living wage economy is where we want to get to. The SNP are proposing a minimum wage of £8.70 an hour, and that all just helps to lift the income levels, because those earning at the bottom end of the pay scale are far more likely to be spending that money in the local economy. So there's a benefit of us all if we manage to achieve this.
Yep, look, I think it's about guaranteeing young people a job, apprenticeship or training. We're going to use the money from the bankers' bonuses to create a scheme that guarantees that. I think it's about protecting our NHS. Labour are going to tax the £2 million houses and use that money to provide funding equal to 1,000 nurses in Scotland. It's also about childcare. You know, I met with a group of young fathers at the Sure Start last week, and I was telling them about how Labour have got plans to double paid paternity leave. It was Labour that introduced paternity leave in the first place, but to double paid paternity leave to 4 weeks. And then, oh, I'm going to get my yellow card. And then also it's about the minimum wage and the living wage as well. You know, Labour are going to give tax breaks to companies that pay the living wage to really take proper action to encourage it and, you know, as Owen says, get a living wage economy. And that's not bad for 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, what's broken is the democratic system. We fixed that, we fixed a lot of things. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, we've got community empowerment, I would say, is the one thing that for me is really important. Devolving decision-making to the lowest practicable level. That's why I supported independence. That's why I support bringing decision-making down to local councils from Holyrood, for example. I was involved in the campaign for the community to take on the Bonnyrigg Leisure Centre last year, and I was shocked at the way the community were treated. I want to see more community empowerment.
Candidates to try and keep this in the Westminster context. The next question is about TTIP. What's your view about TTIP? Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing for the economy? Sorry, Kenny.
Well, look, the most important thing is to make sure that our public services and the NHS are completely taken out of TTIP. You know, I met with some of the campaigners from 30 Degrees that were at Jarnat Court 2 weekends ago, and I was having a good chance to speak with some of them. And it's so removed. It's not, you know, people talk about, oh, Westminster this, and Council that, or Holyrood this, and say that all three of them are removed. This is a whole range of things that's happening behind closed doors. And it's the European Parliament who, not that many people, in the grand scheme of things, even voted for, that are you know, approving this. And I'm glad, on the other hand, that Labour MEPs are ruling out and redlining anything. You know, if the NHS and our public services are involved, that's the right thing. But look, it's worrying when things like our NHS could be part of this, and I'm against that thoroughly.
Thank you. TTIP is being banded very much as a threat to the NHS. I've looked quite hard at it, and it really isn't. It's good political football at the moment. But what it is it's a trade partnership. It does lower barriers, enables freer trade. It will lower prices in shops, which will make your money go further. It will actually enable us to be competitive across a wider market. That's important. Now, we use. And I find it interesting, I don't know whether everybody else on here is going to say no, they're against TTIP. They may well do, because they're going to say it's going to threaten your NHS, but that's just not true. So I think it's misused.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and this is maybe something you won't hear too often, I agree with Kenny. I think we do. We absolutely have to oppose anything where the NHS comes under threat through TTIP. That's not to say there aren't some parts of it that could actually be potentially beneficial, but we need to be very, very, very careful about how that's put forward. That is being discussed in places behind closed doors, and SNP MEPs are equally arguing to make sure that any inclusion of NHS or any threat to NHS is absolutely opposed. But beyond that, we need to make sure that any agreement that does come forward absolutely rules out any opportunity for corporations to sue governments, because there's absolutely outrageous to think that a corporation could take the government to court on the basis of a disagreement with a democratic decision. That has to be gone as well. So it's protection for the NHS and stopping them corporations being able to sue national governments.
Has been said about the threat to public services, but I think it goes much wider than that. What TTIP does is it locks in privatisation. If anyone thinks that it might be a bit cheaper privatising parts of public services, then get a subscription to privatise. But apart from that, it also reduces our ability to stop things like genetic modification of food, to stop fracking, for example, because companies would then be able, possibly and probably, because we don't know exactly what to do, to sue governments which stop fracking or stop GMOs. These are just examples of the kind of things that are happening. It's not just public services.
This is one of the very, very few questions where you'll actually get a sort of consensus of agreement from the whole panel. TTIP it's being banded around a lot, as we've already heard. It's got the potential to be positive potential, but the biggest concern I have is the fact it is going on behind closed doors. There's a distinct lack of transparency. if we can manage to sort of protect our public services, then yes, but the biggest issue for me is the lack of transparency.
The next question is about austerity. What cuts do you think are coming? And do you believe that austerity has worked? And can I start with Kenny, please?
No, austerity's failed. You know, and in the first year of a Labour government after May, there'll be £800 million of spending increase right away. Now, you've asked me specifically what cuts do I think are coming. Now, you know, the answer is under full fiscal austerity with the SNP, there would be £7.6 billion worth of cuts coming. And exactly, an SNP audience, you know, people can boo and, you know, raspberry as much as they like, but unfortunately, that's the reality. And that's why, you know, this whole thing of saying, well, I agree, we should agree on the things that we agree on. I really disagree with the policy of full fiscal austerity. I think we won't stop.
Well, what cuts are going to come, that depends who you vote for. I have to agree with Kenny. I think with the SNP we're looking at £7.6 billion in cuts. That's going to affect the poorest and vulnerable society. I don't agree with the policy. I think SNP have been they've played a fantastic campaign, but they've really worked on the emotional aspect. If you look at Labour, you're going to get £70 million worth of borrowing. So what's going to get cut? Everything. If you look at Tories, you're going to get £50 billion potentially worth of cuts. What's going to get cut? Pretty much all the important things. All these parties and policies that are going to, the cuts are going to affect the poorest and the most vulnerable in society. But we do need cuts. We are recovered from a deficit. There's no two ways about it. The Liberal Democrats, they will make some cuts, but they will also do a balanced thing. It's got to be a balance of the both. We need to look at bringing people back into work, really supporting that. We've got too many people that, through no fault of their own, are stuck in a benefit system. We need to look at them and help them, but we need to recognise that there are those that stay there willingly as well.
Yeah, wise.
Owen?
Has austerity worked? Absolutely not. It's completely the wrong position to take, and I think we need to be investing our way out of it, as I've said previously. I know that the Labour Party have some issues about cuts and whether or not they're going to make them or not, depends who's in charge on what any given day. But what we do know is that only 40% of the cuts that have been proposed have been implemented so far. 60% of them that are outlined are still to come. And we saw Labour and the Tories going through the doors at the House of Commons voting for a further £30 of cuts. We know they're coming, they just won't tell us where. And I think it's outrageous and we need an alternative to that.
Interesting that everybody's saying it hasn't worked. So it's not good that there are 174,000 more jobs. It's not good that we're the fastest growing economy in the G7. It's not good that unemployment in young people is down. These things are not good. These things don't add up to something working. Well, I think the alternative might be worse, to be perfectly honest. So, sorry, you can't hear me. Is that why the hands are going up?
The mic's on the table.
Is it working? It's not on. I'll try and shout a bit louder. Sorry. So, yes, there are more cuts coming under a Conservative government. We've never made any bones about that. We've never lied about it. What we have got is a reduction in bureaucracy planned. I think that's important. I would like to see a huge shrinking of government, to be quite honest. I think we will face cuts in benefits. We know that the cap is going to come down. But the main thing is we're going to get more people into work, as we've proved we can do over the last 5 years. And that's where a lot of the savings will come from. Because once people are working and we're not paying out in benefits, it's better for them and it's better for the country.
In one sense, austerity's worked the way the Tories wanted it to work. They wanted to clamp down on benefits and welfare and make a smaller state, as they tend to call it. Now, one cut I would like to see is something of the 120 billion, is the highest figure I've seen, £120 billion a year, which is lost through tax avoidance and tax evasion. That nobody knows where this 12 billion, that's a tenth of that, is going to come from if the Tories get back in. So, you know, the answer's there, 10 times over.
Question on the environment. Owen, do you think that climate change might be the most serious issues politicians need to tackle?
Climate change is certainly up there, and it's not something that we can tackle overnight. I think we've seen some element of action being taken so far. More obviously needs to be done, because we do only have one planet and we need to do what we can to look after it. I mean, that to be said, we need to balance that with the fact that we have got an economy, we have people who need jobs, we need to have transport. So it needs to be looked at in the round, and it can't simply be looked at in isolation, but absolutely needs to be up towards the top of the list of priorities.
No, I don't think it's the most important issue. That was the question, and it's not. The economy is the most important issue, and I think that in terms of getting everything right, the arguments about the environment come alongside it all, and a lot of the changes we need to make are very simple ones in terms of how we improve our world that we live in, but it certainly isn't the most important issue.
Ian.
I'm sorry, but science says we've got to leave 80% of the fossil fuels in the ground if the temperature rise over the next century is going to be kept within 4 degrees. And 4 degrees is possibly serious. Anything over that is catastrophic. So I don't know where your economy is going to be if we go over 4 degrees. Really, we've got to keep 80% of fossil fuels. Think of that. Every time you see a politician clamouring for tax help for people to explore for more oil, people to open cast coal mines, people to explore for this, that and the other, which is going to add to that, we've got to stop doing it.
Climate change is a very, very important issue. It's up near the top. I don't think it is the most important thing, but I think it certainly sits near the top. Lived in for proposing 5 climate change laws. We want to bring in zero emissions by 2050. The Scottish target is 80% by 2050. We're going for the full 100% zero emissions. There is a balance. The economy still has to function. I was listening to a radio article when I was driving in, and they said that they believe that solar energy will be the main sort of like renewable energy by 2050, and it's going to basically, it's a lot cheaper. Solar energy, wind power is now working out a lot cheaper than fossil fuel. But that said, there still is a place for that, and we have to be aware and be conscious of what's going on with that. But yeah, it's really, really important. But in direct answer to the question, I do not believe it's the most important. I believe it's one of the most important.
Yeah, it is one of the most important issues. You know, it's difficult being asked to rank. You know, do I think it's more important than fighting poverty or tackling unfairness? No. But is it something that we have to get a grip on and start dealing with properly? Yes. I mean, there's things like, you know, Labour have put a triple lock on, for example, fracking, so that you'd have to have a local referendum, because we all know we like referendums, and you would have to have a local community would have to agree to want fracking in the locality, which I think is a good thing. I think that fracking is probably an interesting test of whether people and political parties take climate change seriously these days, and there's a decent amount of consensus on it, which probably suggests, yeah, people are taking climate change seriously. We need to get to carbon neutral energy production, which is a big thing, and we need to get there sooner rather than later. But it's important, but I don't think it's my personal #1 issue.
The final question that I have here from the audience is on the Smith Commission. What new powers would you like to see in the Scottish Parliament? And were you disappointed by the Smith Commission?
The ones with a promise would be good.
Yeah, it's not something I've followed too greatly because it's been more devolved issue to Holyrood. But again, you know, my feeling tends to be that devolve as much as you can. But one thing that I've become wary of recently is full fiscal autonomy, which has been talked about. We, as many people know, had a distinctive voice from the SNP during the referendum, independence referendum. We believed that you need to have a separate currency with your own ability to borrow and to set reserves, which would help when you hit situations like we've got at the moment. It could be a short-term blip with the oil price dropping. So in areas like that, yes, I do want more devolution, but it has to come with the powers to be able to overcome problems like that.
Well, look, I think one of the good things is that the Scottish Parliament is going to be one of the most powerful devolved assemblies in the world. Look, people had a referendum, a choice. You know, we voted to keep the UK together, but powers have come to Holyrood. You know, if you asked me, similar to the last one, is that the most important question to me? No. You know, moving powers from one building that can be out of touch to another building that can be out of touch isn't something that gets me up in the morning. It's about getting that power to people, and sometimes that's through Holyrood, sometimes that should be through council. But you've also got to think, you know, if you always abstract on powers, right, and I say this not because I think it will be a popular thing to say in the room, but if you always abstract on powers, you've got to remember the Scottish Parliament's had the power to increase tax since it was conceived, and it hasn't used it. So let's not always let the politicians in Holyrood off the hook by always saying, oh, if only they had the powers. Sometimes that's not true, and sometimes Holyrood needs a bit more pressure put on it to be responsible. So I think that's maybe what's going to happen now. It's going to be a really powerful Parliament, and let's see it prosper.
I think somebody sort of checked out earlier about the powers that are promised. Well, actually the Smith Commission, everything is actually on track for that, and it's on track to get delivered on time. So the Smith Commission involved parties, all parties' involvement on them. Everyone had a chance to input. So I think in terms of what powers would I bring into devolution, it's not about what I want, it's about what people want, and people have voted. The Smith Commission went through, all parties were involved, they all put their 10 pence worth in, the agreement was reached. So on a general level, I'm satisfied with the powers that we're achieving. We are going to be one of the strongest nations as we are as part of a bigger union, and that's something that we all voted for as a majority. And I think, you know, there's a big focus on devolution, referendum again. I think we need to remember 55% voted yes. The sovereign will of the people was heard, and I think certainly from the SNP's camp, they need to get over it. The referendum is over and done with.
I think it was interesting. I mean, I think most of us here took part in the Smith Commission and gave evidence to it on what we thought should be brought forward. And actually, there is quite a lot coming forward, and I think it's a real opportunity for Scotland to use those powers that are coming forward, both in terms of tax raising, its proportion of its VAT, air passenger duty, housing benefits. All these things are now going to be controlled in Scotland. And I think this is a chance for Scotland to mature in terms of using some of that and showing how it can use it and actually taking some fiscal responsibility of its own. So yeah, I am satisfied, and I actually will watch with real interest and hopefully have some input over the next few years to actually say, where is Scotland going? Because ultimately I think we're headed for a federal UK, and this is the first step on actually getting that maturity around how we use it.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, what new powers? All of them. That would be what I would say. Smith Commission has failed. We were promised the world and we've been delivered a potato. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. We were told, Gordon Brown came to Midlothian just before the referendum and said he wanted the closest thing to a federal state you can get in a country where 85% of the population are in one part of it. Only in January, Ed Miliband said he wanted to introduce a Home Rule Bill in the first 100 days of the next Parliament. Well, to me, a Home Rule Bill would actually bring with it full fiscal autonomy, which I am a big fan and supporter of. Because I think the more responsibility, the more decisions that we take in Scotland, the better those decisions will be, and we'll actually see the growth and the engagement and the delivery that we all want to see to help support and grow our communities.
I've tried to ask the questions that have been written when you came in the door. If I've missed anybody, I'm really sorry. I've run way over time as it is. What I'd like to do now is to open the floor up. So if you have a question, we have roving mics that I do hope will work. Can you limit your question to that is relevant to the Westminster elections rather than the local issues? And please be polite.
Given that we are basically applying to us for a job. You got my name first. My name is Joe Wallace. I'm a local councillor. I'll start again. Basically, you're applying to us as the electorate for a job. And tonight you haven't actually produced a CV. So I would like you to tell us your life experiences that would make us want to choose you as an MP. Because in the past we've had too many people who have left university and had no jobs whatsoever, and have ended up as Chancellors of the Exchequer and Prime Ministers, and they've never had a real job in their life. Could you tell us what your real life experiences are that would make you be the best MP for Midlothian?
Okay. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, kicking off then. It's interesting, I only got involved in politics 4 years ago. So I have had a life of working, as I said at the beginning. Started as a nurse, then into health service management, both strategic and operational. I used to manage acute medicine in Edinburgh, to give you an idea. So that's all the front door services and medical wards, with a very large budget and all the incumbent bits that go with it. I originally trained in the finance element of the NHS, so I know quite a little bit about structure. Started a business, manufacturing company, and have run a manufacturing company alongside my husband for the last 25 years. So I would say I've got a pretty rounded element, and I've also worked in the voluntary sector and supported the voluntary sector for drug and alcohol needs for some of the most vulnerable people and offenders coming out of prison. So that's my work history, and I think I stand on it.
That's a really good question, by the way. Yeah, my life history, I went to university, did a degree, came out, couldn't get a job, worked for an abattoir for 2 years in Paisley. I then left them because I didn't like the job, signed on for a while, and I joined RBS as a temp, realised I had some prospects there and stayed with them for about 12, 13 years, as I mentioned. Post-credit crunch, disillusioned. Can't swear, can I? I was not treated well, let's just say, by the establishment. Very disillusioned. I left, and again, I was signing on for a while, and I got pulled back into the financial industry. Worked there for about a year, and then my family circumstances changed. My mum got diagnosed with cancer, so as a result, I left. Started getting involved in the family business. So my work history, I think, is very diverse. I'm a part-time carer to my mum. She's had cancer 3 times. She's recovering from her last stage 4 she had last year, so I do part-time caring for that. I work in the family business, so very, very busy. I don't have a political background. I don't have that experience, but actually I think that makes me an asset because I'm not weighed down by that baggage.
Look, you're absolutely right. You know, we need to step outside the political bubble. You know, I just want to wish you good evening, Mr. Provost. Look, you asked about you know, our experience. Look, I worked for the Labour Party. I thought it was important to try and stop a Tory government. I worked for Scottish Opera. You know, I think it's important that Scotland's got a vibrant cultural scene. I also served as chairman of the Citizens Advice Bureau down at Dalkeith, away from politics, you know, in a voluntary role. And I think that's taught me, maybe not something intellectually, maybe I already knew it on paper, but it's made me understand how it hurts when these sanction targets are pushed forward. It's made me understand that if a quarter of sanctions are overturned on appeal, maybe there's too many getting handed out in the first place, and maybe there's quite a lot that were wrongly handed out that weren't getting overturned. So I think that's been a good experience, and it's going to stand me in good stead. I've had my yellow card, but thanks for that, Joe.
While at high school, I worked in the fruit and veg department at Sainsbury's at Strayton. I then went to university, studied accounting and finance before starting a career in financial services. I did that for a few years, was a compliance supervisor. For any of you who are in financial services know what that is. That's the one who comes and checks up on everyone, so not always the most popular. And then for the last 9 years I've been a councillor, and as I said earlier, the last 18 months the council leader.
I don't know how far you want to go back, but I was born in a I was born in a council house in a place called Kirby, just outside Liverpool. My MP was Harold Wilson at the time. Lived in various council estates just outside Liverpool before coming to Edinburgh. Studied physics at Edinburgh University, including meteorology, so I'm quite an expert in climate change if anyone wants to catch me on that subject later on. After university, I worked for 30 odd years in IT in the Royal Bank of Scotland. I took early retirement when they were clearing everyone out at the credit crunch. I became a freelance bookkeeper, tended to do work for social enterprises. I don't know if you've heard of the Melting Pot in Edinburgh, where there's lots of contacts there in the social enterprises. Did a lot of work for them and various different charities, social enterprises. Became a councillor in 2012 and gave that up, and I've been a councillor ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Donna Mackey. I would just like to say that tonight there was talk about work from each of the parties that they were going to get rid of through the austerity cuts. But my question is actually with regard to the zero-hour contracts, which have actually put a lot of people into the brink of poverty, and the effect it has on them, the yo-yo effect on their benefits, and the, having to rely on food banks and everything. And I'd just like to know what each of the parties are going to do with regard to creating jobs and not going back down the road of zero-hour contracts.
Zero-hour contracts, in terms of a big thing that we talk about in politics, are new. Zero-hour contracts aren't new. It's one of these things that's gone like that in the last 5 years. So the problem is, the ones that were being used before they were designed to exploit people, were fine. It was people who were working, maybe as students working, or people who were broadly happy. Now they're exploiting people. You're being asked to wait by the phone to be told when you're working, but you're not necessarily knowing when you're going to work. What Labour are going to do is, if you've worked for 12 weeks in what was a zero-hour contract, your contract will get upgraded to a proper one. It's like the Working Time Directive. You'd have to opt out and sign your rights away if you didn't want to be part of that. So it's really about banning exploitative zero-hour contracts, and you can do it for 12 weeks, which might be a university summer job or something. But it's wrong, fundamentally wrong, to have people working jobs, and I meet people on the doorsteps who tell me about it, working a proper job, proper hours, and not getting a proper contract.
Zero-hour contracts have become very emotive recently. I used to work on a zero-hours contract because it suited me. I had to work night duty when we first started our company in order to support our family. And I couldn't commit to the same hours or the same amount of hours each week, so I did it for that reason. And 66% of people on zero-hour contracts are in that position. They want it. Now, the point about exploitative zero contracts is the word that Kenny's using, is actually it's those who are prohibiting you from working for anybody else. And actually we're in the process of banning that already, because that is wrong, and everybody would agree that's wrong. So I think, again, you need to be careful about it being too emotive. You need to address the issue, not the subject, because zero contracts in themselves are not necessarily a problem.
Yeah, I think it is. It's very much, it comes down to exploitative zero-hour contracts. I mean, I know people who work as nurses, and some of you might have heard of bank nurses, where there's opportunities to go and work, and that actually benefits these people in many ways. But that being said, there are those who do look to exploit, and they have exclusivity clauses where the person on the zero-hour contract is not allowed to work for anybody else because they have to be on call at any given time and they get the given hours at short notice. These we need to absolutely hit hard and hit quickly. Unfortunately, Labour Party doesn't have the best record in this, because Tony Blair in '95 said that he was going to get rid of zero-hour contracts, and then after 13 years of government did nothing about it. So the track record sadly isn't there, but hopefully this time they actually mean it.
Yeah, I think as previous speakers have said, it's exploitative zero-hour contracts because it does, it's suitable for some people, but for a lot it's not. And I think that's the crux of this. I think we want to make sure that there is adequate workplace representation for all workers and not just for zero-hour contracts. You've got split shifts, for example. You've got other people who are called on at fairly short notice to do a full week's work, but you know, you've got situations with supply teachers and things like that where contracts change, but we need to make sure they're negotiated. We have strong trade unions, and those trade unions have rights to work on behalf of all workers.
Similar to the panel, I don't think zero-hour contracts are bad in themselves. It's the fact that they're abused and exploited by some not very nice companies, a lot of which have been in the media recently. I think we need to knuckle down on that. I think we can also expand on zero-hour contracts as well, because they do work for a lot of people. I know people myself right now that work on zero-hour contracts, and it works brilliantly for them. There's seasonal industries, there's nurses, teachers, as we talked about. There's lots of trades and industries that it works for, as long as it's not being abused. But I think we can expand on it by giving workers rights after a certain time. I don't know if it will go the 12-week time scale, but certainly there's definitely things that we can expand upon to give those workers access to time off and sick pay and things like that as appropriate as time goes on. But I don't think they're actually bad in themselves. Regarding your point about jobs, I think we've already proven that 174,000 more people in employment. In the UK, 78% of the employed people are in full-time employment. So I have to agree with Michelle. I think a lot's been made about zero-hour contracts. It's perhaps been, I think the figures have been slightly put out of context. So in themselves, they're not a bad thing, I don't think. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Colin McLean, and I'd like to say that people of Midlothian want their politicians at Westminster to work together for the benefit of the people. And we've been pretty shocked today to hear one party leader say that one party could be locked out of UK government because of its stance on the UK. My question to the panel is, who do you think your parties should be working with at Westminster in a coalition arrangement?
Michelle.
You're right, parties should work together for the best of the country. And I think that is the key issue, because for a coalition to work, you actually have to have some consensus on what you're trying to achieve and where you're going with it. And I would never sit here and say, well, I'm not going to work with them, I'm not going to work with them. But the reality is you've got to share some vision about what you're trying to achieve, and if you can't do that, then you're not going to have a successful coalition, and an unsuccessful coalition is an unstable country. We can't afford to do that at present.
Yeah, which party would the Scottish Greens work with? It's not something that's taxed my brain a lot. But the serious part of this question is that we are actually asking ourselves about coalitions. And one thing that I've noticed looking at the media, London-based and Edinburgh-based, is that people in Scotland are quite surprised that people in the UK as a whole don't seem to think coalitions work. And we've had them for years up here in Scotland, because we've had to, because we've got a proportional system which, apart from the aberration last time, which meant that the SNP got a majority on a minority vote. It shouldn't have happened that way. But we need to get into the mindset where coalitions do and can work, and we should change the voting system so smaller parties like the Greens can have a say in that.
It's not going to surprise you when I say I'm working for a Labour majority. And I think one of the biggest issues is that throughout history, the biggest party has formed a government. So that's the big choice people have got. It's going to be a Labour government. It's going to be a Labour government. I'm happy to answer the question from my friend Colin, who I think is the treasurer of the SNP here, so it's always good to answer the questions. It's going to be a Labour government or a Tory government. I'm not going to get into second guessing what people have decided, because there's no point in me as a candidate to be your MP playing fantasy football and guessing about coalitions. I tell you what I want though, is I want people who want rid of the Tories, with all due respect, people who want rid of the Tories to vote for the alternative to that, which is a Labour government column.
The question was, who do I think is going to coalition? A bit lost in all the chat there. It doesn't really matter what I think, to be honest with you. It's all about the voters. It's the government. The party's job is to answer to the people. So, in some respect, it's absolutely irrelevant what any of us say or think, or what the parties think. Whether or not we get on with each other makes no difference. If we are voted in, we've got to get on for the sake of the country. It's what you put first. I think that the Lib Dems have proven we've worked in coalition type agreements with the Scottish Government. Obviously, I'm going to fly the flag from that party, but we've proven in 5 years of coalition with the Tories, there's a lot of things we don't agree on, and I think this week we've seen, since everyone's manifestos have been coming out, the cat fights are calling, and he said, she said, and I apply that to every single party, including my own. That's been going on. But when push comes to shove, when the situation calls for it, I was going to say something else there, when the situation calls for it, it doesn't matter what we think, we have to get on, because it's about the country, it's about us and our futures.
We are seeing a changed landscape. We saw it in the outcome of the 2010 election, where so many people got really confused at the fact that there wasn't a majority in Westminster. We saw in Scotland from 2007 to 2011 that a minority government can also work. You actually get good decision making because you have to work hard for every vote. As a party, the SNP, we've ruled out doing a formal coalition with any party. We've also said that we'll take every step possible to prevent another Tory government. Now, if that means that we end up with a Labour government in a minority that we would support on a vote-by-vote basis, I think there's some real benefits in that. Because in that scenario, we would get the best deals for Scotland out of that. We wouldn't be continually being pulled into decisions for South East of England. We would be able to make the case on a case-by-case basis to get the strongest possible decisions that we would be able to make the case for, so that the voices from Midlothian are actually heard far louder in that sort of arrangement.
Now we've got the opportunity for 2 more questions, and I'll take 1 man and 1 woman.
Um, 80% of the country's wealth is held by about 2% of the people. And these 2% pay about 20 to 25% of tax. Do you think that the 80%, that the 2% should be paying more of the tax to help the country and to get it out of its deficit?
Yes, I do. We live in a wealthy country, one of the most unequal in the world, and we really have to start redistributing that wealth a bit, I'm afraid. We're talking about increasing the top rate of tax from 45 pence in the pound to 60 pence in the pound. Now, I think the last time it was at that level, it was put there by Mrs. Thatcher. So I don't think we're being particularly left-wing on that. Also, we would like to see things like corporation tax, for example, brought up to a similar level with other countries, and the money that would be gained from that should be going towards increasing the minimum wage to redistribute wealth in the way I think we really have to.
Hi there, thank you for that. Yes, I do, absolutely. I don't think the struggles that we're in just now should be burdened by everybody. We should all carry that can, regardless of how it started, to move forward and get our country back on track. We should all share that burden. The wealthy are more fortunate. Well done to them for being able to make more money than the rest of us, and thank you very much. It'd be great if they can contribute more, and I think they should. I would be really cautious about doing something like a 60% income tax rate, though, because we still have future generations to look at. We can't tax ourselves out of the market. We go to 60%. We've got to stay competitive, and people will just leave the country. So it's kind of like losing the cash cows, to be honest. We've got to be careful how we do it. But yes, they should burden it. We've managed to bring in about £85 billion in extra taxation from tax avoidance individuals and organisations that have done tax avoidance. 31 billion of that was from corporations that have avoided tax. So certainly the policies that are in there, it's been working. But yeah, I think more can be done. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think whatever you're doing when you're talking about taxation, you need to be doing whatever you can to make it as progressive as you possibly can. Those with the broadest shoulders should absolutely be holding the burden to support those who need that help. As a party, we would certainly support introduction of a banker's bonus tax and a bill on tax avoidance. I think that is a start to the process, but absolutely, those who are earning the most should be doing far more to make sure that we're supporting those who really do need that help.
Yes, definitely I agree with you, they should be paying more. You know, Labour are going to put the tax rate up to 50% if you're earning over £150,000. The other thing, of course, is cracking down on tax evasion when people think, oh, I'll make my money in Britain, I'll live in Britain for just under half a year and then I'll have my official home in the West Indies. You've got to crack down on these people, and Labour have said you've got 6 months to open the books and show us what's happening there, and I think that's a good thing. On corporation tax, do you know, I disagree ever so slightly with Ian there. I think what Labour are going to do is, you know, firmly in line with what I believe, put corporation tax up 1% for the bigger companies, but then also drop corporation tax by 1 point for small businesses. You know, and I see Ian, to be fair, nodding in agreement there. Because small businesses are not necessarily that 2%, in fact they won't be that 2%. There'll be people who might be, you know, struggling to get by, or might be employing people and struggling to prosper so that they can employ people. And I think probably Labour's made a smart move on that, and I'm quite proud that corporation tax goes up for big companies only. Banker's bonus tax, absolutely proud that that's a Labour achievement, and also really pleased with the way that money's been earmarked to help people who need a start get a good start.
Michelle.
Okay, 20% of the country, the richest 20%, will pay more towards the deficit than the whole of the other 80% put together. That's fact. The richest 1% pay 25% of the tax, and that's going to rise to 27% of the tax. The whole point about taxation is to raise money, okay? And if you just use it as a motive kicking ball, then actually you don't achieve what you set out to do in the first place. And that was proven when Labour, right at the end of their period, raised the tax by to 50p for the richest people, and the tax take went down. When it was lowered again to 45, the tax take went up by 8 billion. So, you know, it's not about what sounds good, it's about what actually achieves the aim. So it's the same with corporation tax. I mean, it's right. If you have lower corporation tax, you're more competitive for companies to come and actually operate in your country. And that's actually what you want to achieve, because that's what creates jobs and that's what creates the income. So taxation is only progressive if you actually earn money off it. If you're just doing it to sound good and get elected, then you're actually screwing the people over.
Hi, hello there. In June 2012, the UK government promised to get serious about ending violence against women. What priority will you place to ratify the Istanbul Convention on this?
Look, I've got to be honest, I need to know more about the Istanbul Convention. That's something I'm going to go away and look at. Sometimes you see a politician make it up and try and bluff their way. There's two things though that I would say. You know, one of them is about having women in positions of leadership. I think is a good thing to change the way that people talk about women and stop people from being put off of that. The other thing I think is about how Britain uses its overseas aid budget. I think that a good thing we have seen, to be fair, is DFID looking at projects abroad which can help to empower girls and women and go on to things like education and good jobs. So I'm proud of that. I'll tell you what I'll do tonight, sir, is go away and have a proper look at the Istanbul Convention that you mentioned, and I'm happy to get back in touch with you and give you my views on that if that's something you'd like.
Violence against women has been actually a very hot topic in Scotland. And I think we've done a lot here to actually move towards a better society in terms of addressing that fact. It's about power, it's about inequality, it's about societies as well that actually use that power to ensure male dominance. We do have to address it, and I think we have to make sure that we get our own house in order before we go telling everybody else how to do it. I'm not sure we've actually got our own house in order. I spent a day with the police out here on a shift, and violence against women, domestic abuse, is still the #2 problem in Midlothian. #1, anybody know what #1 is? Acquisitive theft, basically, theft from people. So we've got to get our own house in order first, and once we've done that, then we can go tell everybody else how to do it.
Yeah, I agree with Kenny on that. I'm rather ignorant about the Istanbul Convention, but I think what we need to do, and this addresses many of the issues, not just that particular one, particularly to do with crime, for example, is social cohesion. We need to improve social cohesion, and we need to reduce inequality. And if you look at the Scandinavian countries, and I think this issue was gone through quite in some depth during the independence referendum. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, where inequality is lower, you do see lower incidences of crime of all sorts, as well as other issues in society which tend to dissipate. So I would address it from that point of view. Reduce up inequality, improve social cohesion, and I think that this, along with other issues, will be reduced.
I know little of the Istanbul Convention. I think it's deeply unfortunate the UK government hasn't ratified it yet, because I can see no reason not to have done so. Violence against women is an issue that we need to tackle no matter where it happens, be it locally here in Midlothian, anywhere else in the UK, or actually across the world. If there's something we can do to make a step towards tackling violence against women, we need to do it. And all we're asking here is for the UK government to ratify a treaty that's already been agreed. Why won't they do it? So I think we need to make that push as quickly as possible to ensure that this country does sign up and ratify to be fully compliant with the Istanbul Convention.
Like my colleagues, I have to confess I'm not that familiar with the Istanbul Convention, so I'm sorry I can't give you a direct answer to that particular question. But certainly, as regards violence against women, it's fatal, it's disgusting. It shouldn't exist. I think it's something that has unfortunately been around for a long time. I hold my answer as a combination of everyone's answer. I don't think anyone can actually justify that. But I would take it one step further and say there's been a lot of reports and studies about violence against men, and I don't think enough of a spotlight is given to that. There's a real stigma associated with that.
Well, there is actually.
There is absolutely, and I don't think there's enough goes on to sort of help and support men that are the victims of violence from women, and it's more common than you would think. But certainly it's about education, it's about empowerment. I think I would agree with Ian in terms of, I think the gender inequality certainly has an impact to play, and that's something that we need to work on here and across the board. We have a moral and social obligation to everybody internationally to support and stop things like this.
The Istanbul Treaty was set up to safeguard services that provide services for these, and to stop cuts in funding to them. But 37 countries have signed up to that. You signed up to that in 2012, and you haven't ratified that. And all you've done is cut these services. You know, the government signed up to that, so why aren't they agreeing to stop these cuts and sign up to this and ratify it?
Thank you, sir.
Every single year.
I'm sorry, could I please ask the floor? Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your participation. It's not been an easy job for me because this is the first Hustings I have ever attended. If your questions have not come about, what I would ask you to do is to go to the next Hustings, which I believe is on tomorrow, and try and get your questions in, because you know they're the best still in the world. We've tried. I have tried my best to be as equal and as across the board as I can be. But I'd just like to thank Owen, Michelle, Ian, Aisha, and Kenny for their attendance tonight. Good evening.